Hi, welcome back to Storytime. Just a heads up, I have noticed on Sundays that there seem to be a lot of dropped frames because I think, everybody likes to stream on Sundays. So, just a warning that this stream may drop, but it'll come back. Like if it happens, just refresh. And also another warning, I have been dealing with a headache for the last 3 days. Can't find my migraine meds. I should not be put in charge of important stuff. So if I decide to cut the stream short, which I'm hoping not to do, that is the reason why. But anyways, we have a lot of fun, mysterious horror stuff in Paris to get through. So if we are ready, we will go ahead and begin. And this is the night that Christine suddenly disappeared on the opera stage in front of an entire audience. Chapter 16. Mame Giry and the Ghost. Before following the commissary into the manager's office, I must describe some extraordinary events that took place in that office, where Remy and Mercier had vainly tried to obtain admission, and where Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin had locked themselves in for a reason which the reader does not yet know, but which it is my duty as an historian to reveal without further delay. I have had occasion to say that the manager's mood had undergone a change for the worse for some time past, and to convey the fact that this change was due not only to the fall of the chandelier on the famous night and the gala performance. The reader must know that the ghost had calmly received his first 20,000 francs. Oh, there had been wailing and gnashing of teeth indeed, and yet the thing had happened as simply as could be. One morning, the managers found on their table an envelope ready addressed to Monsieur O.G. private, and accompanied by a note from O.G. himself. The time has come to carry out the clause in the lease, but please put 20 notes of 1,000 francs each into this envelope, seal it with your own seal, and hand it to Mame Giry, who has my instructions. The managers did not hesitate, without wasting time in inquiring how those confounded communications came to be delivered in an office where they were careful to keep locked. They seized this opportunity of laying hands on the mysterious blackmailer. And, after telling the whole story, under promise of secrecy to Gabrielle and Mercier, they put the 20,000 francs into the envelope and, without asking for explanations, handed it to Mame Giry, who had been reinstated in her functions. The box-keeper displayed no astonishment. I need hardly say that she was well watched. She went straight to the ghost's box and placed the precious envelope on the little shelf attached to the ledge. The two managers, as well as Gabrielle and Mercier, were hidden in such a way that they did not lose sight of the envelope for a second during the performance, and even afterwards, for as the envelope had not been moved, those who watched it did not move either. The theater emptied, and Mame Giry went away while the managers, Gabrielle and Mercier, were still there. At last they became tired of waiting and opened the envelope, after ascertaining that the seals had not been broken. At first sight, Richard and Moncharmin thought that the notes were still there, but soon they perceived that they were not the same. The 20 real notes were gone and had been placed by 20 notes of the Bank of Saint-Farce, the Bank of St. Farce. The manager's rage and fright were unspeakable. Moncharmin wanted to send for the commissary of police, but Richard objected. He no doubt had a plan of his own, for he said, "Don't let us make ourselves ridiculous. All Paris would laugh at us. O.G. has won the first game. We will win the second." He was evidently thinking of the next month's allowance. Nevertheless, they had been so absolutely tricked that they were bound to feel a certain dejection. And upon my word, it was not difficult to understand. We must not forget that the managers had an idea at the back of their minds that this strange incident might, all the time, be only an unpleasant practical joke on the part of their predecessors, and that it would not do to divulge it prematurely. On the other hand, Moncharmin was sometimes troubled with suspicion of Richard himself, who occasionally had queer ideas, and so they were content to await events, while keeping an eye on Mame Giry. Richard would not have spoken to, Richard would not have her spoken to. If she's a confederate, he said, the notes are gone long ago, but in my opinion, she is merely an idiot. She's not the only idiot in this business, said Moncharmin pensively. Well, who could have expected it, moaned Richard. But don't be afraid, next time I shall have taken my precautions. The next time fell on the very day that witnessed the disappearance of Christine Daae. In the morning, a note from the ghost reminded the managers that the money was due. Do just as you did last time, said O.G. amiably. It worked very well. Put the 20,000 francs in the envelope and hand it to our excellent Madame Giry. And the note was accompanied by the usual envelope. They had only to insert the notes. This was done about half an hour before the curtain rose on the first act of Faust. Richard showed the envelope to Moncharmin. Then he counted the 20,000 franc notes in front of him and put the notes into the envelope without closing it. And now, he said, let's have Mother Giry in. The old woman was sent for. She entered with a sweeping curtsy. She still wore her black taffeta dress, the color of which was rapidly turning to rust and lilac, to say nothing of the dingy bonnet. She seemed in a good temper. She at once said, "Good evening, gentlemen. It's for the envelope, I suppose?" "Yes, Madame Giry," said Richard most amiably. "For the envelope, and something else besides." "At your service, Monsieur Richard, at your service. And what is the something else, please?" "First of all, Madame Giry, I have a little question to put to you." "By all means, Monsieur Richard. Mame Giry is here to answer you." "Are you still on good terms with the ghost?" "Couldn't be better, sir, couldn't be better." We are delighted. Oh, hi, Drink, how are you doing? I'm glad you could tune in. Let's see. At your service, Monsieur Richard, at your service. And what is the something else, please? First of all, Mame Giry, I have a little question to put to you. By all means, Monsieur Richard. Mame Giry is here to answer you. And are you still on good terms with the ghost? Couldn't be better, sir, couldn't be better. Ah, we are delighted. Look here, Madame Giry, said Richard in the tone of one making an important confidence. We may still as well tell you, among ourselves, you're no fool. Why, sir, exclaimed the box-keeper, stopping the pleasant nodding of the two black feathers on her dingy bonnet. I assure you no one has ever doubted that. We are quite agreed, and we shall soon understand one another. The story of the ghost is just a good joke, is it not? Well, still between ourselves, it has lasted long enough. Mame Giry looked at the managers as though they were talking Chinese. She walked up to Richard's table and asked rather anxiously, What do you mean? I don't understand. Oh, you understand quite well. In any case, you've got to understand, and first of all, tell us his name. Whose name? The name of the man whose accomplice you are, Mame Giry. I am the ghost's accomplice? I? This accomplice in what, pray? You do all he wishes. Oh, he's not very troublesome, you know. And does he still tip you? I can't complain. How much does he give you for bringing him that envelope? 10 francs. You poor thing, that's not much, is it? Why? I'll tell you why presently, Mame Giry. Just now, we should like to know for what extraordinary reason you have been giving yourself body and soul to this ghost. Mame Giry's friendship and devotion are not to be bought for 5 francs or 10 francs. That's true enough, and I can tell you the reason, sir. There's no disgrace about it. On the contrary. We're quite sure of that, Mame Giry. Well, it is like this, only the ghost doesn't like me to talk about his business. Indeed, sneered Richard. But this is a matter that concerns myself alone. Well, it was in box 5 one evening I found a letter addressed to myself, a sort of note written in red ink. I needn't read the letter to you, sir. I know it by heart, and I shall never forget it if I live to be 100. And Mame Giry drew herself up, recited the letter with touching eloquence. Madame, 1825, Mademoiselle Ménétrier, a dancer, became Marquis de Cousset. 1832, Mademoiselle Marie Taglioni, a dancer, became Comtesse Gilbert de Voisin. 1846, La Sota, a dancer, married a brother of the King of Spain. 1847, Lola Montez, a dancer, became the morganatic wife of King Louis of Bavaria and was created Comtesse of Landsfeld. 1848, Mademoiselle Maria, a dancer, became Baronne d'Erneville. 1870, Therese Hessler, a dancer, married Dom Fernando, brother to the King of Portugal. Richard and Moncharmin listened to the old woman, who, as she proceeded with the enumeration of these glorious nuptials, swelled out, drew herself up, took courage, and, at last, in a voice bursting with pride, flung out the last sentence of the prophetic letter. 1885, Meg Giry, Empress. Exhausted by this supreme effort, the box-keeper fell into a chair, saying, Gentlemen, the letter was signed Opera Ghost. I have heard speak of the ghost, but only half believed in him. From the day when he declared that my little Meg, the flesh of my flesh, the fruit of my womb, could be empress, I believed in him altogether. And really it was not necessary to make a long study of Mame Giry's hysterical features to understand what could be got out of that fine intellect with the two words ghost and empress. But who pulled the strings of that extraordinary puppet? That was the question. You have never seen him. He speaks to you, and you believe all he says? Asked Moncharmin. Yes, to begin with, I owe it to him that my little Meg was promoted to be the leader of a row. I said to the ghost, if she is to be empress in 1885, there is no time to lose. She must become a leader at once. He said, look upon it as done. And he had only a word to say to Monsieur Poligny, and the thing was done. So you say that Monsieur Poligny saw him? No, not any more than I did, but he heard him. The ghost said a word in his ear, you know, on the evening when he left box 5, looking so pale. Moncharmin heaved a sigh. What a business, he groaned. Ah, said Mame Giry, I always thought that there were secrets between the ghost and Monsieur Poligny. Anything that the ghost asked Monsieur Poligny to do, Monsieur Poligny did. Monsieur Poligny could refuse the ghost nothing. You hear, Richard? Poligny could refuse the ghost nothing. Yes, I hear, said Richard. Monsieur Poligny is a friend of the ghost, and as Mame Giry is a friend of Monsieur Poligny, there we are. But I don't care a hang for Monsieur Poligny, he added roughly. The only person whose fate really interests me is Madame Giry. Madame Giry, do you know what is in this envelope? Why, of course not, she said. Well, look. Mame Giry looked into the envelope with a lackluster eye, which soon recovered its brilliancy, however. 1,000-franc notes, she cried. Yes, Madame Giry, 1,000-franc notes. And you knew it. I, sir? I swear. Don't swear, Madame Giry. And now I will tell you the second reason why I sent for you. Madame Giry, I am going to have you arrested. The 2 black feathers on the dingy bonnet, which usually affected the attitude of 2 notes of interrogation, changed into 2 notes of exclamation. As for the bonnet itself, it swayed in menace on the old lady's tempestuous chignon. Surprise, indignation, protest, and dismay were furthermore displayed on little Meg's mother in a sort of extravagant movement of offended virtue, half bound, half slide, that brought her right under the nose of Monsieur Richard, who could not help pushing back his chair. "Have me arrested!" The mouth that spoke those words seemed to spit the 3 teeth that were left to it into Richard's face. Monsieur Richard behaved like a hero. He retreated no further. His menacing forefinger seemed already to point out the keeper of Box 5 to the absent magistrates. "I am going to have you arrested, Madame Giry, as a thief." "Say that again!" And Madame Giry caught Monsieur Manager Richard a mighty box on the ear before Monsieur Manager Moncharmin had time to intervene. But it was not the withered hand of the angry old bedlam that fell on the managerial ear, but the envelope itself, the cause of all the trouble, the magic envelope that opened with a blow scattering the banknotes, which escaped in a fantastic whirl of giant butterflies. The 2 managers gave a shout, and the same thought made them both go on their knees, feverishly picking up and hurriedly examining the precious scraps of paper. "Are they still genuine, Moncharmin? Are they still genuine, Richard?" "Yes, they are still genuine." Above their heads, Mame Giry's 3 teeth were clashing in a noisy contest, full of hideous interjections, but all that could be clearly distinguished was the leitmotif. "I, a thief? I, a thief? I!" She choked with rage. She shouted, "I never heard of such a thing!" And suddenly she darted up to Richard again. "In any case," she yelped, "you, Monsieur Richard, ought to know better than I where the 20,000 francs went." "I?" asked Richard, astounded. "And how should I know?" Moncharmin, looking severe and dissatisfied, at once insisted that the good lady should explain herself. "What does this mean, Madame Giry?" he asked. "And why do you say that Monsieur Richard ought to know better than you where the 20,000 francs went to?" As for Richard, who felt himself turning red under Moncharmin's eyes, he took Madame Giry by the wrist and shook it violently. In a voice growling and rolling like thunder, he roared, "Why should I know better than you where the 20,000 francs went to? Why? Answer me!" "Because they went into your pocket," gasped the old woman, looking at him as if he were the devil incarnate. Moncharmin would have rushed upon Madame Giry if Moncharmin had not stayed his avenging hand and hastened to ask her more gently, "How can you suspect my partner, Monsieur Richard, of putting 20,000 francs in his pocket?" "I never said that," declared Mame Giry, "seeing that it was I myself who put the 20,000 francs into Monsieur Richard's pocket." And she added under her voice, "There, it's out, and may the ghost forgive me." Richard began bellowing anew, but Moncharmin authoritatively ordered him to be silent. "Allow me! Allow me! Let the woman explain herself. Let me question her." And he added, "It is really astonishing that you should keep up such a tone. We are on the verge of clearing up the whole mystery, and you're in a rage. You shouldn't behave like that. I'm enjoying myself immensely." Mame Giry, like the martyr that she was, raised her head, which beamed with faith in her own innocence. "You tell me there were 20,000 francs in the envelope which I put into Monsieur Richard's pocket, but I tell you again that I knew nothing about it, nor Monsieur Richard either, for that matter." "Aha!" said Richard, suddenly assuming a swaggering air which Moncharmin did not like. "I knew nothing either. You put 20,000 francs in my pocket, and I knew nothing either. I am very glad to hear it, Madame Giry." "Yes," the terrible dame agreed. "It's true. We neither of us knew anything, but you must have ended it by finding it." Richard would certainly have swallowed Mame Giry alive had Moncharmin not been there. But Moncharmin protected her. He resumed his questions. What sort of envelope did you put in Monsieur Richard's pocket? It was not the one which we gave you, the one which you took to box 5 before our eyes, and yet that was the one which contained the 20,000 francs. I beg your pardon. The envelope which Monsieur le Directeur gave me was the one which I slipped into Monsieur le Directeur's pocket, explained Mame Giry. The one which I took to the ghost's box was another envelope just like it, which the ghost gave me beforehand, and which I hid up my sleeve. So saying, Mame Giry took from her sleeve an envelope ready prepared and similarly addressed to that containing the 20,000 francs. The managers took it from her. They examined it and saw that it was fastened with seals stamped with their own managerial seal. They opened it. It contained 20 banks of St. Farce notes, like those which had been so much astounded them the month before. "How simple," said Richard. "How simple," repeated Moncharmin, and he continued with his eyes fixed upon Mame Giry, as though trying to hypnotize her. "So it was the ghost who gave you this envelope, and told you to substitute it for the one which we gave you, and it was the ghost who told you to put the other into Monsieur Richard's pocket." "Yes, it was the ghost." "Then would you mind giving us a specimen of your little talents? Here is the envelope. Act as though we knew nothing." "As you please, gentlemen." Mame Giry took the envelope with the 20 notes inside it and made for the door. She was on the point of going out when the 2 managers rushed at her. "Oh, no, no, no. We won't be done a second time, once bitten, twice shy." "I beg your pardon, gentlemen," said the old woman, in self-excuse. "You told me to act as though you knew nothing." "Well, if you knew nothing, I should go away with your envelope." "And then how would you slip it into my pocket?" argued Richard, whom Moncharmin fixed with his left eye, while keeping his right on Mame Giry. A proceeding likely to strain his sight, but Moncharmin was prepared to go to all lengths to discover the truth. "I am to slip it into your pocket when you least expect it, sir. You know that I always take a little turn behind the scenes in the course of the evening, and I often go with my daughter to the ballet foyer, which I am entitled to do as her mother. I bring her her shoes when the ballet is about to begin. In fact, I come and go as I please. The subscribers come and go too. So do you, sir. There are lots of people about. I'll go behind you and slip the envelope into the tall pocket of your dress coat, a tail pocket. There's no witchcraft about that." "No witchcraft," growled Richard, rolling his eyes like Jupiter Tonus. "No witchcraft! Why, I've just caught you in a lie, you old witch." Mame Giry bristled with her teeth, 3 teeth sticking out of her mouth. "And why, may I ask?" "Because I spent that evening watching box 5 and the sham envelope which you put there. I was not in the foyer of the ballet for 1 second. "No, sir, I did not give you the envelope that evening, but at the next performance, on the evening when the Under-Secretary of the State for Fine Arts—" At these words, Monsieur Richard suddenly interrupted Mame Giry. "Yes, that's true, I remember now. The Under-Secretary went behind the scenes. He asked for me. I went down to the ballet foyer for a moment. I was on the foyer steps. The Under-Secretary and his chief clerk were in the foyer itself. I suddenly turned round. I had felt you pass behind me, Madame Giry. You seemed to push against me. There was no one else behind me." "Oh, I can see you still. I can see you still." "Yes, that's it, sir, that's it. I had just finished my little business. That pocket of yours, sir, is very handy." And Mame Giry once more suited the action to the word. She passed behind Monsieur Richard, and so nimbly that Moncharmin himself was impressed by it, slipped the envelope into one of the tail pockets of Monsieur Richard's dress coat. "Of course!" exclaimed Richard, looking a little pale. "It's a very clever of O.G. The problem which he had to solve was this: how to get rid of any dangerous intermediary between the man who gives the 20,000 francs and the man who receives it. And by far the best notion he could hit upon was to come and take the money from my pocket without my noticing it, as I myself did not know that it was there. It's wonderful." "Oh, wonderful, no doubt," Moncharmin agreed. "Only you forget, Richard, that I provided 10,000 francs of the money, that nobody put anything in my pocket." Okay, since we're at the end of a chapter, I'll reply to chat. Thank you for being patient, and I'm sorry about all these dropped frames. Oh, okay. Well, no worry about not chatting. Like with story time, I usually wait until between the chapters to reply. And I hope you have success with your homework. Ooh, nice. Would love to see a picture of that kicking when you're finished. All right. Oh, hi, Josu. How are you doing? Good to see you. Good to see that everybody has tuned in. How's the audio, by the way? And is there much like choppiness because of all the dropped frames, or is it doing all right? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and continue, and I will, SM64. What is SM64? Oh, okay, yeah. I wonder why that could be. Yeah, I have the microphone in a box that has, oh, of course, Super Mario. Well, that's cool. Nice. Yeah, I tried to make it as dead as possible in there, you know, not too echoey. I have some foam at the back of the box to try to deal with that. But maybe I'll have to move that forward. I'll play around with it between streams. Or let me see if I can maybe fix it really quick right now. If there's uncomfortable noises, I apologize. We'll try to be as quick as possible. Okay, we'll try that. And let me know if there are any audio problems. Chapter 17, The Safety Pin Again. Moncharmin's last phrase so clearly expressed the suspicion in which he now held his partner that it was bound to cause a stormy explanation, at the end of which it was agreed that Richard should yield to all Moncharmin's wishes, with the object of helping him to discover the miscreant who was victimizing them. This brings us to the interval after the Garden Act, with the strange conduct observed by Monsieur Remy, and those curious lapses from the dignity that might be expected of the managers. It was arranged between Richard and Moncharmin, first, that Richard should repeat the exact movements which he made on the night of the disappearance of the first 20,000 francs, and, secondly, that Moncharmin should not for an instant lose sight of Richard's coat-tail pocket, into which Mame Giry was to slip the 20,000 francs. Monsieur Richard went and placed himself at the identical spot where he had stood when he had bowed to the Undersecretary for Fine Arts. Monsieur Moncharmin took up his position a few steps behind him. Mame Giry passed, rubbed up against Monsieur Richard, got rid of her 20,000 francs in the manager's coat-tail pocket and disappeared, or rather, she was conjured away. In accordance with the instructions received from Moncharmin a few minutes earlier, Mercier took the good lady to the acting manager's office and turned the key on her, thus making it impossible for her to communicate with her ghost. Meanwhile, Monsieur Richard was bending and bowing and scraping and walking backwards, just as if he had that high and mighty minister, the Under-Secretary for Fine Arts, before him. Only, though these marks of politeness would have created no astonishment if the Under-Secretary of Fine Arts had really been in front of Monsieur Richard, they caused an easily comprehensible amazement to the spectators of this very natural but quite inexplicable scene, when Monsieur Richard had nobody in front of him. Monsieur Richard bowed to nobody but his back, before nobody, and walked backwards before nobody, and a few steps behind him, Monsieur Moncharmin did exactly the same thing as Monsieur Richard was doing, in addition to pushing away Monsieur Remy and begging Monsieur de la Borderie, the ambassador, and Monsieur Parabise, the manager of the Crédit Central, not to touch Monsieur le Directeur. Moncharmin, who had his own ideas, did not want Richard to come to him presently, when the 20,000 francs were gone, and say, perhaps it was the ambassador, or the manager of the Crédit Central, or Remy. The more so as, at the time of the first scene, as Richard himself admitted, Richard had met nobody in the part of the theatre after Mame Giry had brushed up against him. Having begun to walk by walking backwards in order to bow, Richard continued to do so from prudence until he reached the passage leading to the offices of the management. In this way he was constantly watched by Moncharmin from behind, and himself kept an eye on anyone approaching from the front. Once more, this novel method of walking behind the scenes, adopted by the managers of our National Academy of Music, attracted attention, but the managers themselves thought of nothing but their 20,000 francs. On reaching the dark passage, Richard said to Moncharmin in a low voice, "I am sure that nobody has touched me. You had now better keep at some distance from me, and watch me till I come to the door of the office. It is better not to arouse suspicion, and we can see anything that happens." But Moncharmin replied, "No, Richard, no. You walk ahead, and I'll walk immediately behind you. I won't lead you by a step." "But in that case," examined Richard, "they will never steal our 20,000 francs." "I should hope not, indeed," declared Moncharmin. "Then what we are doing is absurd. We are doing exactly what we did last time. Last time I joined you as you were leaving the stage and followed close behind you down this passage." "That's true," sighed Richard, shaking his head and passively obeying Moncharmin. 2 minutes later, the joint managers locked themselves into their office. Moncharmin himself put the key in his pocket. "We remained locked up like this last time," he said, "until you left the opera to go home." "That's so? No one came and disturbed us, I suppose?" "No one." "Then," said Richard, who was trying to collect his memory, "then I must certainly have been robbed on my way home from the opera." "No," said Moncharmin, in a drier tone than ever. "No, that's impossible. For I dropped you in my cab. The 20,000 francs disappeared at your place. There's not a shadow of a doubt about that." "That's incredible," protested Richard. "I am sure of my servants, and if one of them had done it, he would have disappeared since." Moncharmin shrugged his shoulders as though to say that he did not wish to enter into details, and Richard began to think that Moncharmin was treating him in a very insupportable fashion. "Moncharmin, I've had enough of this." "Richard, I've had too much of it." Do you dare to suspect me? Yes, of a silly joke. One doesn't joke with 20,000 francs. That's what I think, declared Moncharmin, unfolding a newspaper and ostentatiously studying its contents. What are you doing? Asked Richard. Are you going to read the paper next? Yes, Richard, until I take you home. Like last time? Yes, like last time. Richard snatched the paper from Moncharmin's hands. Moncharmin stood up, more irritated than ever, and found himself faced by an exasperated Richard, who, crossing his arms on his chest, said, Look here, I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of what I might think if, like last time, after my spending the evening alone with you, you drove me home, and if, at the moment of parting, I perceived that 20,000 francs had disappeared from my coat pocket, just like last time. And what might you think? Asked Moncharmin, crimson with rage. I might think that, as you hadn't left me by a foot's breadth, and as, by your own wish, you were the only one to approach me, like last time, I might think that, if that 20,000 francs had was no longer in my pocket, it stood a very good chance of being in yours. Moncharmin leapt up at the suggestion. Oh, he shouted, a safety pin. What do you want a safety pin for? To fasten you up with. A safety pin, a safety pin. You want to fasten me up with a safety pin? Yes, and to fasten you to the 20,000 francs. Then, whether it's here, or at the drive from here to your place, or at your place, you will feel the hand that pulls out your pocket, and you will see if it's mine. Ah, so you're suspecting me now, are you? A safety pin! And that was the moment when Monsieur Moncharmin opened the door on the passage and shouted, A safety pin! Somebody give me a safety pin! And we also know, at the same moment, Remy, who had no safety pin, was received by Moncharmin, while a boy procured the pin so eagerly longed for. And what happened was this. Moncharmin first locked the door again. Then he knelt down behind Richard's back. I hope, he said, that the notes are still there. So do I, said Richard. The real ones? Asked Moncharmin, resolved not to be had this time. Look for yourself, said Richard. I refuse to touch them. Moncharmin took the envelope from Richard's pocket and drew out the banknotes with a trembling hand, for this time, in order frequently to make sure of the presence of the notes, he had not sealed the envelope, nor even fastened it. He felt reassured on finding that they were all still there and quite genuine. He put them back in the tail pocket and pinned them with great care. Then he sat down behind Richard's coat-tails and kept his eyes fixed on them, while Richard, sitting at his writing table, did not stir. A little patience, Richard, said Moncharmin. We have only a few minutes to wait. The clock will soon strike 12. Last time we left at the last stroke of 12. Oh, I shall have all the patience necessary. The time passed, slow, heavy, mysterious, stifling. Richard tried to laugh. I shall end by believing in the omnipotence of the ghost, he said. Just now, don't you find something uncomfortable, disquieting, alarming in the atmosphere of this room? You're quite right, said Moncharmin, who was really impressed. The ghost, continued Richard in a low voice, as though fearing lest he should be overheard by invisible ears. The ghost! Suppose all the same it were a ghost who puts the magic envelope on the table, who talks in box 5, who killed Joseph Bouquet, who unhooked the chandelier, and who robs us. For after all, there is no one here except you and me, and if the notes disappear, and neither you nor I have anything to do with it, well, we shall have to believe in the ghost. At that moment, the clock on the mantelpiece gave its warning click, and the first stroke of 12 was heard. The two managers shuddered. The perspiration streamed from their foreheads. The 12th stroke sounded strangely in their ears. When the clock stopped, they gave a sigh and rose from their chairs. I think we can go now, said Moncharmin. I think so, Richard agreed. Before we go, do you mind if I look in your pocket? But of course, Moncharmin, you must. Well, he asked as Moncharmin was feeling at the pocket. Well, I can feel the pin. Of course, as you said, we can't be robbed without noticing it. But Moncharmin, whose hands were still fumbling, bellowed, I can feel the pin, but I can't feel the notes. Come, no joking, Moncharmin. This isn't the time for it. Well, feel for yourself. Richard tore off his coat. The two managers turned the pocket inside out. The pocket was empty. And the curious thing was that the pin remained stuck in the same place. Richard and Moncharmin turned pale. There was no longer any doubt about the witchcraft. A ghost, muttered Moncharmin. But Richard suddenly sprang upon his partner. No one but you has touched my pocket. Give me back my 20,000 francs. Give me back my 20,000 francs. On my soul, sighed Moncharmin, who was ready to swoon. On my soul, I swear I haven't got it. Then somebody knocked at the door. Moncharmin opened it automatically, seemed hardly to recognize Mercier, this business manager, exchanged a few words with him without knowing what he was saying, and, with an unconscious movement, put the safety pin, for which he had no further use, into the hands of his bewildered subordinate. I'm really quickly going to put my hair up. Sorry, I have a lot of hair. All right, that's done. Take a quick drink. Chapter 18. The Commissary of Police. The first words of the Commissary of Police when he entered the manager's office were to ask after the missing prima donna. Is Christine Daae here? Christine Daae, echoed Richard. No, why? As for Moncharmin, he had not the strength left to utter a word. Richard repeated for the commissary, and the compact crowd which had followed him into the office observed an impressive silence. Why do you ask if Christine Daae is here, Monsieur le Commissaire? Because she must be found, declared the Commissary of Police solemnly. How do you mean she must be found? Has she disappeared? In the middle of the performance. In the middle of the performance? This is extraordinary. Isn't it? And what is quite as extraordinary is that you should first learn it from me. Yes, agreed Richard, taking his head in his hands and muttering, what is this fresh trouble? Oh, it's enough to make a man send in his resignation. And he pulled a few hairs of his mustache without even knowing what he was doing. So she disappeared in the middle of the performance, he repeated as though in a dream. Yes, she was carried off in the prison act, at the moment when she was invoking the aid of the angels. But I doubt if she was carried off by an angel. And I am sure that she was there. Everybody looked round. A young man, pale and trembling with excitement, repeated, I am sure of it. Sure of what? Asked Mifroid. That Christine Daae was carried off by an angel, Monsieur le Commissaire, and I can tell you his name. Aha, Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny, so you maintain that Christine Daae was carried off by an angel. An angel of the opera, no doubt? Yes, monsieur, by an angel of the opera, and I will tell you where he lives when we are alone. You are right, monsieur. And the commissary of police, inviting Raoul to take a chair, cleared the room of all the rest, excepting the managers. When Raoul spoke, Monsieur le Commissaire, the angel... then Raoul spoke. Monsieur le Commissaire, the angel is called Eric. He lives in the opera, and he is the angel of music. The angel of music? Really? That is very curious. The angel of music. And, turning to the managers, Mr. Mifroid asked, "Have you an angel of music on the premises, gentlemen?" Richard and Moncharmin shook their heads without even smiling. "Oh," said the Vicomte, "those gentlemen have heard of the opera ghost. Well, I am in a position to state that the opera ghost and the angel of music are one and the same person, and his real name is Eric." Monsieur Mifroid rose and looked at Raoul attentively. "I beg your pardon, monsieur, but are you trying to make fun of the police? And if not, what is all this about the opera ghost?" "I say that these gentlemen have heard of it." "Gentlemen, it appears that you know the opera ghost?" Richard rose, with the remaining hairs of his mustache in his hand. "No, Monsieur Commissary, no. We do not know him, but we wish we did, for this very evening he has robbed us of 20,000 francs. And Richard turned a terrible look at Moncharmin, which seemed to say, "Give me back the 20,000 francs, or I'll tell the whole story." Moncharmin understood what he meant for, with a distant grimace. With a distracted gesture. How did that become those words? He said, "Oh, tell everything and have done with it." As for Mifroid, he looked at the managers and at Raoul by turns, and wondered whether he had strayed into a lunatic asylum. He passed his hand through his hair. "A ghost," he said, "who on the same evening carries off an opera singer and steals 20,000 francs is a ghost who must have had his hands pretty full. If you don't mind, we will take the questions in order. The singer first, the 20,000 francs next. Come, Monsieur de Chagny, let us try to talk seriously. You believe that Mademoiselle Christine Daae has been carried off by an individual called Eric. Do you know this person? Have you seen him?" "Yes." "Where?" "In a churchyard." Monsieur Mifroid gave a start, began to scrutinize Raoul again, and said, "Of course, that's where ghosts usually hang out. And what were you doing in that churchyard?" "Monsieur," said Raoul, "I can quite understand how absurd my replies must seem to you, but I beg you to believe that I am in full possession of my faculties. The safety of the person dearest to me in the world is at stake. I should like to convince you in a few words, for time is pressing and every minute is valuable. Unfortunately, if I do not tell you the strangest story that ever was from the very beginning, you will not believe me. I will tell you all I know about the opera ghost, Monsieur le Commissary. Alas, I do not know much." "Never mind, go on," exclaimed Richard and Moncharmin, suddenly greatly interested. Unfortunately for their hopes of learning some detail that could put them on the track of their hoaxer, they were soon compelled to accept the fact that Monsieur Raoul de Chagny had completely lost his head. All that story about Perrault Guirec, death's heads, and chanted violins could only have taken birth in the disordered brain of a youth mad with love. It was evident, also, that Monsieur Commissary Mifroid shared their view, and the magistrate would certainly have cut short the incoherent narrative if the circumstances themselves had not happened to interrupt it. The door opened, and a man entered, curiously dressed in a huge frock coat and a tall hat at once shabby and shiny, that came down to his ears. He went up to the commissary and spoke to him in a whisper. He was obviously a detective come to deliver an important communication. During this colloquy, Monsieur Mifroid did not take his eyes off Raoul. At last, addressing him, he said, "Monsieur, You have talked enough about the ghost. We will now talk a little about yourself, if you have no objection. You were to carry off Mademoiselle Daae tonight? Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire. After the performance? Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire. All your arrangements were made? Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire. The carriage that brought you was to take you both away. There were fresh horses in readiness at every stage. That is true, Monsieur le Commissaire. And nevertheless, your carriage is still outside the rotunda, awaiting your orders, is it not? Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire. Did you know that there were 3 other carriages there in addition to yours? I did not pay the least attention. They were the carriages of Mademoiselle Soralie, which could not find room in the Cour de l'Administration, of Carlotta, and of your brother, Monsieur de Comte de Chagny. Very likely. What is certain is that, though your carriage and Soralie's and Carlotta's are still there, against the rotunda pavement, Monsieur le Comte de Chagny's carriage is gone. This has nothing to say to, I beg your pardon. Was not Monsieur le Comte opposed to your marriage with Mademoiselle Daae? That is a matter that only concerns the family. You have answered my question. He was opposed to it, and that was why you were taking Christine Daae out of your brother's reach. Well, Monsieur de Chagny, allow me to inform you that your brother has been smarter than you. It is he who has carried off Christine Daae. Oh, impossible, Raoul moaned, pressing his hand to his heart. You sure? Immediately after the artist's disappearance, which was procured by means which we still have to ascertain, he flung himself into his carriage, which drove straight across Paris at a furious pace. Across Paris? Asked poor Raoul in a hoarse voice. What do you mean by across Paris? Across Paris and out of Paris, by the Brussels road. Oh, cried the young man, I shall catch them! And he rushed out of the office. And bring her back to us, cried the commissary gaily. Ah, that's a trick worth 2 of the Angel of Musics. And, turning to his audience, Monsieur Mifroid delivered a little lecture on police methods. I don't know in the least whether Monsieur le Comte de Chagny has really carried off Christine Daae or not, but I want to know, and I believe that, at this moment, no one is more anxious to inform us than his brother. And now he is flying in pursuit of him. He is my chief auxiliary. This, gentlemen, is the art of the police, which is thought to be so complicated, but which, nevertheless, becomes so simple as soon as you see that it consists of getting your work done by people who have nothing to do with the police. But Monsieur le Commissary Mifroid would not have been quite so satisfied with himself if he had known that the rush of this rapid emissary was stopped at the entrance to the very first corridor. A tall figure blocked Raoul's way. Where are you going so fast, Monsieur de Chagny? Asked a voice. Raoul immediately raised his eyes and impatiently raised his eyes and recognized the astrakhan cap of an hour ago. He stopped. It's you, he cried in a feverish voice. You, who know Eric's secret and do not wish me to speak of them, who are you? You know who I am. I am the Persian. Is the echo any better, or is it still there? And is there any strange feedback? All right. Chapter 19. The Vicomte and the Persian. Raoul now remembered that his brother had once shown him that mysterious creature, of whom nothing was known except that he was a Persian, and that he lived in a little old-fashioned flat in the Rue de Rivoli. The man with the ebony skin, the eyes of jade, and the astrakhan cap bent over Raoul. I hope, Monsieur de Chagny, he said, that you have not betrayed Eric's secret. And why should I hesitate to betray that monster, sir? Raoul rejoined haughtily, trying to shake off the intruder. Is he your friend by any chance? I hope that you said nothing about Eric, sir, because Eric's secret is also Christine Daae's, and to talk about one is to talk about the other. Oh, sir, said Raoul, becoming more and more impatient. You seem to know about many things that interest me, and yet I have no time to listen to you. Once more, Monsieur de Chagny, where are you going so fast? Cannot you guess to Christine Daae's assistance, then, sir? Stay here, for Christine Daae is here. With Eric? With Eric. How do you know? I was at the performance, and no one in the world but Eric could contrive an abduction like that. Oh, he said, with a deep sigh, I recognize the monster's touch. You know him, then? The Persian did not reply, but heaved a fresh sigh. Sir, said Raoul, I do not know what your intentions are, but can you do anything to help me? I mean to help Christine Daae. I think so, Monsieur de Chagny, and that is why I spoke to you. What can you do? Try to take you to her, and to him. If you can do me that service, sir, my life is yours. One more word. The commissary of police tells me that Christine Daae has been carried off by my brother, Count Philippe. Oh, Monsieur de Chagny, I don't believe the word of it. It's not possible, is it? I don't know if it is possible or not, but there are ways and ways of carrying people off, and Monsieur le Comte Philippe has never, as far as I know, had anything to do with witchcraft. Your arguments are convincing, sir, and I am a fool. Oh, let us be quick. I place myself entirely in your hands. How should I not believe you, when you are the only one to believe me, when you are the only one not to smile when Eric's name is mentioned? And the young man impetuously seized the Persian's hands. They were icy cold. Silence, said the Persian, stopping and listening to the distant sounds of the theater. We must not mention that name here. Let us say he and him, then there will be less danger of attracting his attention. Do you think he is near us? It is quite possible, sir. If he is not at this moment with his victim in the house on the lake. Oh, so you know that house too. If he is not there, he may be here, in the walls, in the floor, in the ceiling. Come, said the Persian, asking Raoul to deaden the sound of his footsteps, led him down passages which Raoul had never seen before, even at the time when Christine used to take him for walks through that labyrinth. If only Darius had come, said the Persian. Who is Darius? Darius? My servant. They were now in the center of a regular deserted square, an immense space ill-lit by a small lamp. The Persian stopped Raoul, and in the softest of whispers asked, What did you say to the commissary? I said that Christine Daae's abductor was the angel of music, alias the opera ghost, and that his real name was... Hush! Did he believe you? No. He attached no importance to what you said? No. He took you for a bit of a madman? Yes. So much the better, sighed the Persian. And they continued their road. After going up and down several staircases which were new to Raoul, the two men found themselves in front of the door which the Persian opened with a master key. The Persian and Raoul were both, of course, in dress clothes, but whereas Raoul had a tall hat, the Persian wore the astrakhan cap, which I have already mentioned. It was an infringement of the rule which insists upon the tall hat behind the scenes, but in French foreigners are allowed every license. The Englishman has travelling cap, the Persian his cap of astrakhan. Sir, said the Persian, your tall hat will be in your way. You would do well to leave it in the dressing room. Which dressing room? Asked Raoul. Christine Daae's. And the Persian, letting Raoul through the door which he had just opened, showed him the actress's room opposite. They were still at the end of the passage, the whole length of which Raoul had been accustomed to traverse before knocking at Christine's door. How well do you know the opera, sir? Not so well as he does, said the Persian modestly. And he pushed the young man into Christine's dressing room, which was as Raoul had left it a few minutes earlier. Closing the door, the Persian went to a very thin partition that separated the dressing room from a big lumber room next to it. He listened and then coughed loudly. There was a sound of someone stirring in the lumber room, and a few seconds later a finger tapped at the door. "Come in," said the Persian. A man entered, also wearing an astrakhan cap and dressed in a long overcoat or frock. He bowed, took a richly carved case from under his coat, put it on the dressing table, bowed once again, and went to the door. "Did no one see you come in, Darius?" "No, master." "Let no one see you go out." The servant glanced down the passage and swiftly disappeared. The Persian opened the case. It contained a pair of long pistols. "When Christine Daae was carried off, sir, I sent word to my servant to bring me these pistols. I have had them a long time, and they can be relied upon." "Do you mean to fight a duel?" asked the young man. "It will certainly be a duel which we shall have to fight," said the other, examining the priming of his pistols. "And what a duel!" Handing one of the pistols to Raoul, he added, "In this duel we shall be 2-1, but you must be prepared for everything, for we shall be fighting the most terrible adversary that you can imagine. But you love Christine Daae, do you not? You worship the ground she walks on. But you, sir, who do not love her, tell me why I find you ready to risk your life for her. You must certainly hate Eric." "No, sir," said the Persian sadly. "I do not hate him. If I hated him, he would have long ago ceased to do harm." "Has he done you harm?" "I have forgiven him the harm which he has done me." "I do not understand you. You treat him as a monster. You speak of his crimes. He has done you harm, and I find in you the same inexplicable pity that drove me to despair when I saw it in Christine." The Persian did not reply. He fetched a stool and sat against the wall, facing the great mirror that filled the whole of the partition opposite. Then he climbed on the stool, and, with his nose to the wallpaper, seemed to be looking for something. "Ah," he said after a long search, "I have it." And, raising his finger above his head, he pressed against a corner in the pattern of the paper. Then he turned round and jumped off the stool. "In half a minute," he said, "we shall be on his road." And, crossing the whole length of the dressing-room, he felt the great mirror. "No, it is not yielding yet." "Oh, are you going out by the mirror?" asked Raoul. "Like Christine Daae?" "Yes, so you knew that Christine Daae went out by the mirror?" "She did so before my eyes, sir. I was hidden behind the curtain of the inner room, and I saw her vanish, not by the glass, but in the glass." "What did you do?" "I thought it was an aberration of my senses, a mad dream." "Or some new fancy of the ghosts," chuckled the Persian. "Ah, Monsieur de Chagny," he continued, still with his hand on the mirror. Would that he had to do with a ghost. We could then leave our pistols in their case. Put down your hat, please. There. And cover your shirt front as well as you can with your coat, as I am doing now. Bring the lapels forward, turn the collar up. We must make ourselves as invisible as possible." Bearing against the mirror, after a short silence, he said, "It takes some time to release the counterbalance when you press on the spring from the inside of the room. It is different when you are behind the wall and can act directly on the counterbalance. Then the mirror turns at once and is moved with incredible rapidity." "What counterbalance?" asked Raoul. "Why, the counterbalance that lifts the whole of this wall on its pivot. You surely don't expect it to move by itself, by enchantment. If you watch, you will see the mirror rise an inch or two, and then shift an inch or two from left to right. It will then be on a pivot, and will swing round." "It's not turning," said Raoul impatiently. Oh, wait. You have time enough to be impatient, sir. The mechanism has obviously become rusty, or else the spring isn't working. Unless it is something else, added the Persian anxiously. What? He may simply have cut the cord of the counterbalance and blocked the whole apparatus. Why should he? He does not know that we are coming this way. I dare say he suspects it, for he knows that I understand the system. It's not turning, and Christine, Sir Christine, the Persian said coldly. We shall do all that is humanly possible to do, but he may stop us at the first step. He commands the walls, the doors, and the trapdoors. In my country, he was known by a name which means the trapdoor lover. But why do these walls obey him? He did not build them, sir. Yes, sir, that is just what he did do. Raoul looked at him in amazement, but the Persian made a sign to him to be silent and pointed to the glass. There was a sort of shivering reflection. Their image was troubled, as in a rippling sheet of water, and then all became stationary again. You see, sir, that it is not turning. Let us take another road. Tonight there is no other, declared the Persian in a singularly mournful voice. And now, look out, and be ready to fire. He himself raised his pistol opposite the glass. Raoul imitated his movement. With his free arm, the Persian drew the young man to his chest, and suddenly the mirror turned in a blinding daze of cross lights. It turned like one of those revolving doors which have lately been fixed in the entrances of most restaurants. It turned, carrying Raoul and the Persian with it, and suddenly hurled them from the full light into the deepest darkness. Chapter 20. In the Cellars of the Opera. Your hand high, ready to fire, repeated Raoul's companion quickly. The wall behind them, having completed the circle which it described upon itself, closed again, and the two men stood motionless for a moment, holding their breaths. At last, the Persian decided to make a movement, and Raoul heard him slip onto his knees and feel for something in the dark with his groping hands. Suddenly the dimness was made visible by a small dark lantern, and Raoul instinctively stepped backwards as though to escape the scrutiny of a secret enemy. But he soon perceived that the light belonged to the Persian, whose movements he was closely observing. The little red disc was turned in every direction, and Raoul saw that the floor, the walls, and the ceiling were all formed of planking. It must have been the ordinary road taken by Eric to reach Christine's dressing room and impose upon her innocence. And Raoul, remembering the Persian's remark, thought that it had been mysteriously constructed by the ghost himself. Later, he learnt that Eric had found, all ready prepared for him, a secret passage long known to himself alone. It had been contrived at the time of the Paris Commune to allow the gaolers to convey their prisoners straight to the dungeons constructed for them in the cellars, for the Federates had occupied the Opera House immediately. After the 18th of March, he had made a starting place right at the top of their Montgolfier balloons, which carried their incendiary proclamations to the departments, and a state prison right at the bottom. The Persian went on his knees again and put his lantern on the ground. He seemed to be working at the floor. Suddenly he turned off his light. Then Raoul heard a faint click and saw a very pale luminous square in the floor of the passage. It was as though a window had opened on the opera the opera cellars, which were still lit. Raoul no longer saw the Persian, but he felt him by his side and heard his breathing. Follow me and do all that I do. Raoul turned to the luminous aperture. Then he saw the Persian, who was still on his knees, hang by his hands from the rim of the opening, with his pistol between his teeth, and slide into the cellars below. Curiously enough, the Vicomte had absolute confidence in the Persian, though he knew nothing about him. His emotion when speaking of the monster struck Raoul as sincere, and, if the Persian had cherished any sinister designs against him, he would not have armed him with his own hands. Besides, Raoul must reach Christine at all costs. He therefore went on his knees also, and hung from the trap with both hands. "Let's go," said the voice, and he dropped from the arms of the Persian, who told him to lie down flat, dropped into the arms of the Persian, who told him to lie down flat, closed the trap door above him, and crouched down beside him. Raoul tried to ask a question, but the Persian's hand was on his mouth, and he heard a voice which he recognized as that of the commissary of police. Raoul and the Persian were completely hidden behind a wooden partition. Near them, a small staircase led to a little room in which the commissary appeared to be walking up and down, asking questions. The faint light was just enough to enable Raoul to distinguish the shapes of things around him, and he could not restrain a dull cry. There were 3 corpses there. The first lay on the narrow landing of the little staircase. Oh, I'm going to wait a moment. Okay. I'm going to backtrack a little bit because it looks like we possibly just dropped the stream. Raoul and the Persian were completely hidden behind a wooden partition. Near them, a small staircase led to a little room in which the commissary appeared to be walking up and down, asking questions. The faint light was just enough to enable Raoul to distinguish the shape of things around him, and he could not restrain a dull cry. There were 3 corpses there. The first lay on the narrow landing of the little staircase. The 2 others had rolled to the bottom of the staircase. Raoul could have touched one of the 2 poor wretches by passing his fingers through the partition. "Silence," whispered the Persian. He, too, had seen the bodies, and he gave one word in explanation. "He." The commissary's voice was now heard more distinctly. He was asking for information about the system of lighting, which the stage manager supplied. The commissary, therefore, must be in the organ, or its immediate neighborhood. Contrary to what one may think, especially in connection with an opera house, the organ is not a musical instrument. At that time, electricity was employed only for very few scenic effects, and for the bells. The immense building and the stage itself were still lit by gas. Hydrogen gas was used to regulate and modify the lighting of a scene, and this was done by means of a special apparatus which, because of the multiplicity of its pipes, was known as the organ. A box next to the prompter's box was reserved for the gasman, who from there gave his orders to his assistants and saw that they were executed. Mauclair stayed in this box during all the performances. But now Mauclair was not in his box, and his assistants were not in their places. "Mauclair! Mauclair!" The stage manager's voice echoed through the cellars, but Mauclair did not reply. I have said that a door opened in a little staircase that led to the second cellar. The commissary pushed it, but it resisted. "I say," said the stage manager, "I can't open this door. Is it always so difficult?" The stage manager forced it open with his shoulder. He saw that, in doing so, he had pushed a human body, and he could not restrain an exclamation, for he recognized the body at once. "Mauclair! Poor devil, he is dead!" But Monsieur Commissary Mifroid, whom nothing surprised, was stooping over that big body. "No," he said, "he is dead drunk, which is not quite the same thing." "It's the first time, if so," said the stage manager. "Then someone has given him a narcotic. That is quite possible." Mifroid went down a few steps and said, "Look!" By the light of a little red lantern at the foot of the stairs he saw 2 other bodies. The stage manager recognized Mauclair's assistants. Mifroid went down and listened to their breathing. "They are sound asleep," he said, Very curious business. Some person unknown must have interfered with the gas man and his staff, and that person unknown was obviously working on behalf of the kidnapper. But what a funny idea to kidnap a performer on the stage. Send for the doctor of the theater, please, said Mifwa, and he repeated, curious, very curious business. Then he turned to the little room, addressing people whom Raoul and the Persian were unable to see from where they were. What do you say to all this, gentlemen? You are the only ones who have not given your views, and yet you must have an opinion of some sort. Thereupon Raoul and the Persian saw the mantled faces of the joint managers appear above the landing. Only their faces were visible above the landing, and heard Monsieur Moncharmin's excited voice. There are things happening, Monsieur le Commissaire, which we are unable to explain. And the two faces disappeared. Thank you for the information, gentlemen, jeered Mifwa. But the stage manager, holding his chin in the hollow of his right hand, which is the attitude of profound thought, said, Is it not the first time that Mauclair has fallen asleep in the theatre? I remember finding him one evening snoring in his little recess with his snuff-box beside him. Was that long ago? Asked Mifwa, carefully wiping his eyeglasses. No, not so very long ago. Wait a bit, it was that night. Of course, yes, it was the night when Carlotta, Monsieur le Commissaire, gave her famous quack. Really, the night when Carlotta gave her famous quack? And Monsieur Mifwa, replacing his gleaming glasses on his nose, fixed the stage manager with a contemplative stare. So, Mauclair takes snuff, does he? He asked carelessly. Yes, Monsieur le Commissaire. Look, there's a snuff box on that little shelf. Oh, he's a great snuff taker. So am I, said Mifwa, and put the snuff box in his pocket. The Vicomte and the Persian, themselves unseen, watched the removal of the three bodies by a number of scene-shifters, who were followed by the commissary and all the people with him. Their steps were heard for a few minutes on the stage above. When they were alone, the Persian made a sign to Raoul to stand up. Raoul did so. But as he did not lift his hand in front of his eyes, ready to fire, the Persian told him to resume that attitude, and to continue it, whatever happened. But it tires the hand unnecessarily, whispered Raoul. If I do fire, I shan't be sure of my aim. Then shift your pistol to the other hand, said the Persian. I can't shoot with my left hand. Thereupon the Persian made this queer reply, which was certainly not calculated to throw light into the young man's dazed brain. It is not a question of shooting with the right hand or the left. It is a question of holding one of your hands as though you were going to pull the trigger of a pistol, with your arm bent. As for the pistol itself, when all is said, you can put that in your pocket. And he added, Let this be clearly understood, or I will answer for nothing. It is a matter of life and death. And now, silence and follow me. The cellars of the opera are enormous, and they are 5 in number. Raoul followed the Persian and wondered what he would have done without his companion in that extraordinary labyrinth. They went down to the 3rd cellar, and their progress was still lit by some distant lamp. The lower they went, the more precautions the Persian seemed to take. He kept on turning to Raoul to see if he was holding his hand properly, showing him how he himself carried his hand, as if always ready to fire, though the pistol was in his pocket. Suddenly a loud voice made them stop. Someone above them shouted, All the door shutters on the stage! The commissary of police wants them! Steps were heard, and shadows glided through the darkness. The Persian drew Raoul behind a prop. They saw passing before and above them old men bent by age and the past burden of operatic scenery. Some could hardly drag themselves along. Others, from habit, with stooping bodies and outstretched hands, looked for doors to shut. They were the door shutters, the old, worn-out scene-shifters on whom a charitable management had taken pity, giving them the job of shutting doors above and below the stage. They went about incessantly from top to bottom of the building, shutting the doors, and they were also called the draft expellers, at least at that time, for I have but little doubt that by now they are all dead. Draughts are very bad for the voice, wherever they come from. Monsieur Pedro Galehard has told me that he himself created a few additional posts as door shutters for old stage carpenters, who he was unwilling to dismiss from the services of the opera. The Persian and Raoul welcomed this incident, which relieved them of inconvenient witnesses, for some of those door shutters, having nothing else to do or nowhere to lay their heads, stayed at the opera from idleness or necessity, and spent the night there. The two men might have stumbled over them, waking them up and provoking a demand for explanations. For the moment, Monsieur Miffroid's enquiry saved them from any such unpleasant encounters. But they were not left to enjoy their solitude for long. Other shades now came down by the same road by which the door shutters had gone up. Each of these shades carried a little lantern and moved it about above, below, and all around, as though looking for something or somebody. "Bother," muttered the Persian. "I don't know what they are looking for, but they might easily find us. Let us get away, quick! Your hand up, sir, ready to fire? Bend your arm. More. That's it. Hand at the level of your eye as though you were fighting a duel and waiting for the word to fire. Oh, leave your pistol in your pocket. Quick, come along, downstairs." He dragged Raoul down to the 4th cellar. "Level of your eye, question of life and death. Here, this way, these stairs." They reached the 5th cellar. "Oh, what a duel, sir, what a duel." Once in the 5th cellar, the Persian drew breath. He seemed to enjoy a greater sense of security than he had displayed when they stopped in the 3rd cellar, but he never altered the position of his hand. And Raoul, remembering the Persian's observation, "I know these pistols can be relied upon," was more and more astonished, wondering why anyone should be so gratified at being able to rely upon a pistol which he did not intend to use. But the Persian left him no time for reflection. Telling Raoul to stay where he was, he ran up a few steps of the staircase which they had just left, and then returned. "How stupid of us," he whispered. "We shall soon have seen the end of those men with their lanterns. It's the firemen going their rounds." In those days it was still part of the firemen's duty to watch over the safety of the opera, apart from the performances, but this service has since been suppressed. I asked Monsieur Pedro Galehard the reason, and he replied it was because the management was afraid that, in their utter inexperience of the cellars of the opera, the firemen might set fire to the building. The two men waited 5 minutes longer. Then the Persian took Raoul up the stairs again, but suddenly he stopped him with a gesture. Something moved in the darkness before them. "Flat on your stomach," whispered the Persian. The two men lay flat on the floor. They were only just in time. A shade, this time carrying no light, just a shade in the shade, passed. It passed close to them, near enough to touch them. They felt the warmth of its cloak upon them, for they could distinguish the shade sufficiently to see that it wore a cloak which shrouded it from head to foot. On its head it had a soft felt hat. It moved away, dragging its feet along the walls, and sometimes giving a kick into a corner. "Whew," said the Persian. "I've had a narrow escape. That shade knows me, and has twice taken me to the manager's office." "Is it someone belonging to the theater police?" asked Raoul. "Someone worse than that," replied the Persian, without vouchsafing any further explanation. Like the Persian, I can give no further explanation touching the apparition of this shade, whereas in this historic narrative everything else will be normally explained. however abnormal the course of events may seem, I cannot give the reader expressly to understand that the Persian meant by the words, "It is someone worse than that." The reader must try to guess for himself, for I promised Monsieur Pedro Gaillard, the ex-manager of the opera, to keep his secret regarding the extremely interesting and useful personality of the wandering cloaked shade which, while condemning itself to live in the cellars of the opera, rendered such immense services to those who, on gala evenings, for instance, ventured to stray away from the stage. I am speaking of a service of state, and upon my word of honor, I can say no more. Is not he? He? If he does not come behind us, we shall always see his yellow eyes. That is more or less our safeguard tonight. But he may come stealing up from behind, and we are dead men if we do not keep our hands as though about to fire at the level of our eyes before us. The Persian had hardly finished speaking when a fantastic face came in sight, a whole fiery face, not only 2 yellow eyes. Yes, a head of fire came towards them at a man's height, but with no body attached to it. The face shed fire, looked in the darkness like a flame shaped as a man's head. "Oh," said the Persian between his teeth, "I have never seen this before. Pampin was not mad then, after all. He did see it. What can that flame be? It is not he, but he may have sent it. Take care. Take care. Your hand at the level of your eyes, in heaven's name, and at the level of your eyes. I know most of his tricks, but not this one. Come, let us run. It is safer. Hand at the level of your eyes." And they fled down the long passage that opened before them. After a few seconds that seemed to them like long minutes, they stopped. "He does not come this way," said the Persian. "This side has nothing to do with him. This side does not lead to the lake, nor to the house on the lake. But perhaps he knows that we are at his heels, although I promised him to leave him alone and never to meddle in his affairs again." So saying, he turned his head, and Raoul also turned his head, and they again saw the head of fire behind their 2 heads. It had followed them, and it must have run also, and perhaps faster than they, for it seemed to be nearer to them. At the same time, they began to perceive a certain noise, of which they could not guess the nature. They simply noticed that the sound seemed to move and to approach with the fiery face. It was not a noise as though thousands of nails were... it was a noise as though thousands of nails were being scraped against a blackboard, the perfectly unendurable noise that is sometimes made by some little stone inside the chalk grating of the chalkboard. Sorry, that just gave me a shiver. They continued to retreat, but the fiery face came on, gaining upon them. They could see its features clearly now. The eyes were round and staring, the nose a little crooked, and the mouth large, with a hanging lower lip, very like the eyes, nose, and lip of the moon, when the moon is quite red, bright red. How did that red moon manage to glide through the darkness at a man's height with nothing to support it, at least apparently? And how did it go so fast, so straight before it, with such staring eyes? And what was that scratching, scraping, grating sound which it brought with it? The Persian and Raoul could retreat no farther, and flattened themselves against the wall, not knowing what was going to happen because of that incomprehensible head of fire, and especially now, because of the more intense, swarming, living, numerous sound, for the sound was certainly made up of hundreds of tiny sounds that moved in the darkness under the fiery face. And the fiery face came on, with its noise, came level with them, and the 2 companions, flat against the wall, felt their hair stand on end with horror, for they now knew that the 1,000 noises meant. They came in a troop, huddled along in the shadow of the innumerable little scurrying waves, swifter than the waves that rush over the sands at high tide, little night waves, foaming under the moon, under the fiery head that was like a moon. And the little waves passing between their legs climbed up their legs irresistibly, and Raoul and the Persian could no longer restrain their cries of horror, dismay, and pain. Nor could they continue to hold their hands at the level of their eyes. Their hands went down to their legs to push back the waves, which were full of little legs and nails and claws and teeth. Yes, Raoul and the Persian were ready to faint like Pampin, the fireman. But the head of the fire turned round in answer to their cries, and spoke to them, "Don't move. Don't move. Whatever you do, don't come after me. I am the rat-catcher. Let me pass with my rats." And the head of the fire disappeared, vanished in the darkness, while the passage in front of it lit up as the result of the change which the rat-catcher had made in his dark lantern. Before, so as not to scare the rats in front of him, he had turned his dark lantern on himself, lighting up his own head. Now, to hasten his flight, he lit the dark space in front of him, and he sprang along, dragging with him the waves of scratching rats, all the 1,000 sounds. Raoul and the Persian breathed again, though still trembling. "I ought to have remembered that Eric talked to me about the rat-catcher," said the Persian. "But he never told me that the man looked like that, and it's funny that I should never have met him before. Of course, Eric never comes to this part." "Are we very far from the lake, sir?" asked Raoul. "When shall we get there?" "Take me to the lake. Oh, take me to the lake. When we are at the lake, we will call out. Christine will hear us, and he will hear us too. And as you know him, we shall talk to him." "You baby," said the Persian. "We shall never enter the house on the lake by the lake. I myself have never landed on the other bank, the bank on which the house stands. You have to cross the lake first, and it is well guarded. I fear that more than one of those men, old scene-shifters, old door-shutters, who were never seen again, were simply tempted to cross the lake. It is terrible. I myself would have been very nearly killed there, if the monster had not recognized me in time. One piece of advice, sir, never go near the lake. And above all, shut your ears if you hear the voice singing under the water. A siren's voice." "But then what are we here for?" asked Raoul in a transport of fever, impatience, and rage. "If you can do nothing for Christine, at least let me die for her." The Persian tried to calm the young man. "We have only one means of saving Christine Daae, believe me, which is to enter the house unperceived by the monster." "And is there any hope of that, sir?" "Ah, if I had not that hope, I would never have come to fetch you." "And how can one enter the house on the lake without crossing the lake?" "From the third cellar, from which we are so unluckily driven away. We will go back there now. I will tell you," said the Persian with a sudden change in his voice. "I will tell you the exact place where it is between a set piece and a discarded scene from the Roi de Lahore, exactly at the spot where Joseph Bouquet died. Come, sir, take courage, and follow me, and hold your hand at the level of your eye. But where are we?" The Persian lit his lamp again, and flung its rays down 2 enormous corridors that crossed each other at right angles. "We must be," he said, "in the part used more particularly for the waterworks. I see no fire coming from the furnaces." He went in front of Raoul, seeking his road, stopping abruptly when he was afraid of meeting some waterman. Then they had to protect themselves against the glow of a sort of underground forge which the men were extinguishing, and at which Raoul recognized the demons whom Christine had seen on the day of her first captivity. In this way they gradually arrived beneath the huge cellars below the stage. They must at this time have been at the very bottom of the tub, and at an extremely great depth, which we remember that the earth was dug out at 50 feet below the water that lay under the whole of that part of Paris. All the water had to be exhausted in the building of the opera. To give an idea of the amount of water that was pumped up, I can tell the reader that it represented the area of the courtyard of the Louvre, and a height half as deep again as the towers of Notre Dame. And nevertheless the engineers were obliged to leave a lake. The Persian touched a partition wall and said, "If I am not mistaken, this is a wall that might easily belong to the house on the lake." He was striking a partition wall of the tub, and perhaps it would be as well for the reader to know how the bottom of the partition walls of the tub were built, in order to prevent the water surrounding the building operations from remaining in immediate contact with the walls supporting the whole of the theatrical machinery. The architect was obliged to build a double case in every direction. The work of constructing this double case took a whole year. It was the wall of the first inner case that the Persian struck when speaking to Raoul of the house on the lake. To anyone understanding the architecture of the edifice, the Persian's actions would be seen to indicate that Eric's mysterious house was built in the double case formed of a thick wall constructed as an embankment or dam, followed by a brick wall, a tremendous layer of cement, and another wall several yards in thickness. At the Persian's words, Raoul flung himself against the wall and listened eagerly, but he heard nothing except distant steps sounding on the floor of the upper partition of the theater. The Persian darkened his lantern again. "Look out," he said. "Keep your hand up, and silence, for we shall try another way of getting in." And he led him to the little staircase by which they had ascended lately. They went up, stopped at each step, peered into the darkness and the silence, till they came to their third cellar. Here the Persian motioned to Raoul to go on his knees, and in this way crawled on 2 knees and 1 hand, for the other hand was still held in the same position. They reached the end wall. Against this wall stood a large discarded scene from the Roi de Lahore. Close to this scene was a set piece. Between the scene and the set piece there was just room for a body which was found hanging there one day, the body of Joseph Bouquet. The Persian, still kneeling, stopped and listened. For a moment he seemed to hesitate and looked at Raoul. Then he turned his eyes up toward the second cellar, which sent down the faint glimmer of a lantern through a cranny between 2 boards. This glimmer seemed to trouble the Persian. At last he tossed his head and made up his mind to act. He slipped between the set piece and the scene from the Roi de Lahore, with Raoul close upon his heels. With his free hand the Persian felt the wall. Raoul saw him bear heavily upon the wall, just as he had pressed against the wall in Christine's dressing room. Then a stone gave way, leaving a hole in the wall. This time the Persian took his pistol from his pocket and made a sign to Raoul to do as he did. He cocked the pistol, and resolutely, still on his knees, he wriggled through the hole in the wall. Raoul, who would have liked to pass first, had to be content to follow him. The hole was very narrow. The Persian stopped almost at once. Raoul heard him feeling the stone around him. Then the Persian took out his dark lantern again, stepped forward, examined something beneath him, and immediately extinguished the lantern. Raoul heard him say in a whisper, "We shall have to drop a few yards without making a noise. Take off your boots." The Persian handed his own shoes to Raoul. "Put them outside the wall," he said. "We shall find them there when we leave." These 2 pairs of shoes, which were placed, according to the Persian's papers, just between the set piece and the scene from the Roi de Lahore, on the spot where Joseph Bouquet was found hanging, were never discovered. They must have been taken by some stage carpenter or door shutter. He crawled a little farther on his knees, then turned right round and, facing Raoul, said, "I am going to hang by my hands from the edge of the stone and let myself drop into his house. You must do exactly the same. Do not be afraid. I will catch you in my arms." Raoul heard the dull sound of the Persian's fall, and then dropped in his turn. He felt himself clasped in the Persian's arms. "Hush," said the Persian, and they stood motionless, listening. The darkness was thick around them, the silence heavy and terrible. Then the Persian began to make play with the dark lantern again, turning the rays over their heads, looking for a hole through which they had to come, and failing to find it. "Oh," he said, "the stone is closed of itself." And the light of the lantern swept down the wall and over the floor. The Persian stooped and picked up something, a sort of cord, which he examined for a second and flung away with horror. "The Punjab lasso," he muttered. "What is it?" asked Raoul. The Persian shivered. It might very well be the rope by which the man was hanged, the rope which they looked for so long. And, suddenly seized with a fresh anxiety, he moved the little red disk of his lantern over the walls. In this way he lit up a curious thing, the trunk of a tree, which seemed still quite alive, with its leaves and the branches of the tree, ran right up the wall and disappeared in the ceiling. Because of the smallness of the luminous disk, it was difficult at first to make out the appearance of things. They saw a corner of a branch, and a leaf, and another leaf, and, next to it, nothing at all, nothing but the ray of light that seemed to reflect itself. Raoul passed his hand over that nothing, over that reflection. "Hello," he said, "the wall's a looking-glass." "Yes, a looking-glass," said the Persian, in a tone of deep feeling. And, passing the hand that held the pistol over his moist forehead, he said, "We have dropped into the torture chamber." What the Persian knew of this torture chamber, and what there befell him and his companion, shall be told in his own words, as set down in a manuscript which he left behind him, and which I copy as I found it. But that will have to wait for another time, because it is quite a long chapter, and we only have 20 more minutes left. However, we will return to more Phantom of the Opera next Sunday, 2 to 4, and hopefully I won't have a headache, and hopefully we'll have a better connection. Next story time is going to be on Wednesday, and that will be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And after that, I will, of course, do another game stream. I may do a game stream Tuesday night. I will keep you posted on Twitter and on Discord. But yeah, anyways, thank you so very much for hanging out with me, for listening to the story, which I'm having so much fun reading again. This, I think, is the third time I've read it, and I'm enjoying it just as much as I did the first time. And oh boy, when we come back, this is a scene that has stuck with me for many, many years. Anyways, thank you again. I will see you next time. Bye.